Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is January 16, 2022. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the student and teacher protests that have been going on this week over the Omicron variant, which is just raging, and the government policies, which say keep the schools open. Why do they say that? Well, if kids don't go to school, that creates problems for parents and jobs, and they're trying to keep people working. And anyway, this entire pandemic response is a fucking disaster. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So I think that what we're going to do is start with an overview article from Vice. This is from January 12, written by Ella Fassler, titled "Students Are Doing What Adults Won't in the Fight Against Omicron." It's kind of an overview, and then we're going to go into more detail into what's going on in Chicago. So starting with this article, it says, as the Omicron variant rages across the U.S., some students are expressing frustration and worry over being forced back into classrooms with minimal protections. Comment. And that's a very real concern that everyone should have, although the acute phase of an Omicron infection may be somewhat less intense than Delta, particularly if you've been vaccinated and boosted, and so you're less likely to be hospitalized or to die from that infection, particularly if you're vaccinated or boosted. Long COVID, it doesn't matter if the initial phase is severe or not. You can get long-lasting fatigue, immune effects, brain damage, brain fog for 8 months or longer. So this is a real concern. Add to that the fact that it seems from a CDC study that was published last week that COVID in children seems to lead to about a 2.5 times elevated risk of getting either type 1 or type 2 diabetes, which to me is super alarming considering that those have completely different causes. Also, keeping in mind that although Omicron seems to be somewhat less likely than Delta to result in hospitalization and death, if you are vaccinated and boosted in particular, the rate at which it spreads from person to person means that the people who do get hospitalized are overwhelming the hospitals, and we're having a record hospitalizations surge right now, which the director of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, was just on late night TV lying about. Bad situation. So anyway, yes, students, mass action, this is totally required. Walkouts and everything going on. But rather than wait around for fumbling adults, youth across the country are taking matters into their own hands, organizing strikes, participating in citywide walkouts, and laying out detailed proposals for how their well-being could be prioritized during the COVID-19 pandemic. On Wednesday, thousands of students in New York City walked out of class to protest conditions and demand temporarily shutting down schools. Students are also planning a walkout this Friday in Boston, where 4,500 people have already signed a petition calling for a remote learning option. In Oakland, California, over 1,000 students signed a district-wide petition threatening to boycott classes entirely until the school district meets its demands, which include KN95 masks, increased testing, and more outdoor space for students to safely eat lunch. And in Chicago, where in-person classes have resumed after negotiation with the local teachers union, students announced a citywide walkout for this Friday at 12:30 p.m. to bring increased attention to their demands for physical, mental, spiritual, and structural safety. Quote, "We're tired of adult leadership not being able to represent the voice of the people that are affected by the shit that they're putting into place," Santiago de la Garza, a 16-year-old junior at Solorio Academy in Chicago, who plans to participate in the walkout, told Motherboard. Garza and several organizer friends watched Omicron cases rise and, after having flashbacks to the nightmare that was last January, formed ShyRads, a radical youth alliance of largely queer, black and brown youth from a multitude of high schools and neighborhoods. Quote, "We came together on the basis that we need to support ourselves and our peers because no one else is doing that," said Caitlin Savato, a 14-year-old freshman at a public school in Chicago's South Side. Quote, "Every single thing that young people, specifically young black and brown people, do is speculated, it is looked upon, it is policed. Only Chicago's youth is supporting Chicago's youth right now. While all of the adults are hollering and screaming at each other, we've been abandoned and stranded, unquote. ShyRads operates according to non-hierarchical principles, spans across the city, and perhaps most importantly, its members have fun together. Quote, we laugh, we take brain breaks, we play Among Us, said Garza. But the group is also serious about challenging existing power structures that, they told Motherboard, are prioritizing money over people's lives. Garza pointed out that students and their families received increased financial support from Chicago public schools, including EBT cards for groceries while they were remote learning. Quote, if we go back into remote learning, that means refilling EBT cards, and that means offering supports that were there once when we were remote, Garza said. It all ties back to money. They don't care about what we want. They don't care about what's most beneficial. They do not care whose lives they're risking, unquote. In a letter of declaration addressed to Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Chicago Department of Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady and Chicago Public School Executive Pedro Martinez, ShyRads, wrote that they, quote, believe in the reimagination of our education and want to ensure that, quote, it is not just the condition of what learning should look like in the eyes of American capitalists, unquote. They demanded the centering of marginalized student voices in all discussions related to COVID-19 safety plans, and for officials to publicly apologize for negative statements it made about members of the Chicago Teachers Union. Quote, in order to genuinely take into account the best interest of students, ask us directly or include us in the conversations, they wrote. The letter also criticized adult leadership for being, quote, incompetent and manipulating COVID-19 data to fit their political agendas. On January 10th, ShyRads released a detailed proposal that includes COVID-19 relief stipends, the funding of mutual aid projects, providing every student with a personal laptop, and ensuring one full-time therapist for every 30 students, alongside implementing basic safety measures such as N95 masks, rapid antigen tests, and an efficient contact tracing system. Quote, there is no blanket plan that will work for every school and every student. To try to make one would deny some group. It's inevitable. ShyRads wrote, quote, the schools should have their own ability to create plans that work best for their environment and their students. Every school should have a peer pod task force that makes up members of the school body, including teachers, staff, students, parents, and administration, to create the school's specific COVID response plan. We've had direct messages from people from Seattle, New York, different parts of California, from everywhere, said Garza. People are saying that they're reading our letter in their classrooms and they're breaking it down. That is so empowering and so liberating to know that we haven't even been formed for that long and we're already really making what feels like history right now. So commenting, if you're interested in reading the ShyRads statement, there's a 2-page statement that they've posted on Twitter. Just look up CHI-RADS. So the article goes on to talk about what was also happening in New York City regarding student walkouts and protests. Dora Chan, a 17-year-old student at Brooklyn Tech, was one of the students who helped to organize the walkout on Tuesday. We'll show some footage of that here. Chan told Motherboard she estimates around 400 students participated in total at her school and said that students from at least 28 other schools also participated. Quote, the walkout was successful beyond comprehension, she wrote in an email. We've garnered attention and support from every corner of the city, with hundreds of students walking out in a growing demand for schools to temporarily close in light of the surge of COVID-19 cases. While their ultimate demand is for the city to temporarily close schools, Chan said the districts could compromise by offering remote options. Quote, every day, students are forced to make a decision, safety or education, she wrote. With no alternative schooling in place, students are forced to come into school or they risk failing their classes. Though remote learning last year was a nightmare, the current situation warrants a temporary return to remote learning, but the school district and the city fail to understand this. The reality of being a student in New York City right now is incredibly bleak and dark, unquote. School administrators in Oakland and New York City were forced to respond quickly. OUSD Communications Director John Sasaki told local news outlet KRON that the district ordered enough KN95 masks for all students and would distribute them once they are delivered. Sasaki claimed supply chain issues disallowed schools from constructing shaded structures for outdoor seating. In New York City, David Banks, Chancellor of the New York City Department of Education, tweeted that he would invite student leaders to meet with him so that they can, quote, work together for safe and open schools. That's not really possible, but okay. Chan said Banks has not yet responded to student organizers who have tweeted at him and is skeptical about his tweet, but is, quote, looking forward to a response. ShyRads organizers echoed a similar skepticism toward adult engagement. Quote, there's always power dynamics, there's always taking advantage, there's always tokenization, said Sabato. I've been in a lot of conversations with adults or with people in power, and there's a lot of adultism and ageism. They'll ask you for your opinion, but they don't really believe anything you're saying, said Andrea Cespedes, a junior at Lindblom Math and Science Academy in Chicago. Quote, and it's kind of like, dude, this is the community that I'm a part of every single day. I know how it works, I know how these systems operate, and how they never favor young people. The system has been going on for hundreds of years, and nothing is getting better. We're still stuck in the same exact place. So obviously, something that they're doing is wrong, and they always fail to ask young people about how we feel about it. While many students are demanding better COVID protections, some are using the opportunity to radically reimagine the education system, and to demand that learning prioritizes student safety over profits and productivity. Quote, why don't we radically reimagine school? When they say that we are behind what? All this stuff is made up, said Judai Smith, a senior at Kenwood Academy in Chicago. We could literally change education. What is the stuff that we really need? What is the stuff that's actually going to help us grow? So that's the end of that article. And you can see here another headline from Newsweek. This is also from the 12th. California students refuse to go to school unless COVID safety demands met. The article begins by saying almost 1,000 students in Oakland, California have threatened to strike unless their school district reverts to remote learning or delivers on a list of COVID-19 safety demands. Reading through the article, it's clear that those demands include N95s, so premium masks. Personally, with Omicron and how transmissible it is, I don't think that that's enough, but you definitely can't operate schools without them. As far as what the Chicago public health system and the Chicago public schools are doing, this tweet from Anthony Moser says, I think I can safely say this is the most heavily redacted FOIA response, that's Freedom of Information Act, I have ever received. And you can see there, it's just page after page of like solid black. He adds outstanding work, much transparency. Meanwhile, what does some of the science say? We have Andre Damon on Twitter. Myth number 5, schools are as safe as any other place. Fact, a study published November 19, 2020, so we've known this for a while, in Nature found, quote, school closures in the United States have been found to reduce COVID-19 incidence and mortality is death, by about 60%. Okay. And then continuing with that, there's another study published July 2020, found that, quote, school closure was associated with a significant decline in both incidence of COVID-19 and mortality. So basically it confirms those findings, about a 60% reduction. Also, when you factor in how many students have lost a parent or grandparent to COVID because of the pandemic and keeping things open, that's another mental health impact. So yeah, students are doing mass walkouts. And here is also some Boston footage. This really wasn't getting much coverage at all, but there were also walkouts in Boston. All right, so let's turn back now to Chicago, where the teachers union staged a strike. So we have radical student activity and also, a somewhat functioning teachers union. I say somewhat because they really ended the strike, I think, way too quickly. There were demands for remote learning. That would have made more sense. That would have actually challenged Capital, who obviously wants parents working, etc. They backed off of that. But let's get into this article. This is from WBEZ Chicago, titled Chicago Teachers Approve COVID-19 Safety Agreement. The safety agreement passed by a slim majority with nearly 56% of Chicago Teachers Union members voting yes. This is by Sarah Karp, January 12. Members of the Chicago Teachers Union narrowly approved the COVID-19 safety agreement reached this week with the school district, bringing to a formal end the standoff between the union and the school district and the mayor that closed schools for 5 days. Nearly 56% of 18,600 CTU members who voted said yes to the agreement, the CTU announced Wednesday evening. The slim margin reflects a strong sentiment by school staff that the deal did not include enough protections to make a difference for student and staff safety. Comment, I would agree. I definitely would have voted no on that. Teachers and parents also continue to worry about staff shortages, and that was borne out Wednesday, as some schools struggled to staff their classrooms and to offer instruction. The school district said that nearly 89% of teachers reported to work overall. Comment, so in other words, over 11% of teachers did not report to work. CTU President Jesse Sharkey issued a scathing statement showing the depth of the bitter feelings that remain after the negotiations that went really badly with Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Quote, "Put bluntly, we have a boss who does not know how to negotiate, does not know how to hear real concerns, and is not willing to respect our rank and file enough to listen to us when we tell her we need more protection," Sharkey said in the statement. Quote, "Our members' vote today represents a union's and a city's frustration with a mayor that has simmered since the beginning of this pandemic." Sharkey said, quote, "This agreement covers only a portion of the safety guarantees that every one of our school communities deserve." On Tuesday, he said the CTU leadership accepted it because it was as good as they thought they could get. Comment, this is, there's a word everyone should learn when you're studying the U.S. labor movement, concessionist. That kind of thinking is just how you lose, period. If you're not willing to stand up for what you think is right, you're going to get what you think is wrong. It's that simple. Yes, tactical retreat when absolutely necessary. Was it in this case? I would really need to be convinced of that. Continuing, Sharkey said that the mayor was simply unwilling to budge on some issues. Well, that's what she said anyway, and apparently she got her wish. On Wednesday night, he vowed to keep fighting. CTU Vice President Stacey Davis Gates emphasized that getting a safety agreement was significant. Of course, they always emphasize that. The last COVID-19 agreement expired in August. Wow, so what you're saying is you didn't do anything about the Delta wave that was growing all through the fall? Interesting. While the two sides talked on a weekly basis, the school district did not feel pressure to reach a deal. Yeah, so this is because you have to remind them of workers' power, and then they will feel pressure anyway. Striking a conciliatory tone after the agreement was announced on Monday, CPS CEO Pedro Martinez said it included many good parts. He pointed to provisions to increase testing and ensure students and teachers get N95 masks. In a statement issued before Sharkey's, Lightfoot said, quote, "We are pleased we have come to an agreement that guarantees predictability and stability for the rest of the school year." Comment, note the values there. They want butts in seats. That's what it's about, period. They want the system to run. And, I'm telling you now, people aren't going to use the N95 masks properly, and it would be far, far, far better to just shut down, do remote learning. I don't think, personally, I'm skeptical that running an N95 strategy in the United States, given what we've seen with, just everything to date in the shutdown, how people use masks, how people wear them below their noses, all that kind of stuff. Will the spread be somewhat better? Probably. Yes, definitely get and use N95s, absolutely. We should have mask mandates for that across the entire country, period. Supermarkets, doesn't matter where. The question here is more, even with that, is it safe to pack 30 people into a small room for, 8 hours a day over and over and over and over again? That's really more the question. Especially with Omicron, which is just so highly transmissible and which no one in government seems to want to deal with. They just do not seem to want to deal with this fact. We're dealing with a new virus at this point. So Lightfoot's statement goes on, the science tells us that the safest place for our students is to be in the classroom. Comment, that is a bald-faced lie. That is a complete lie. The plurality of where students got COVID, 42%, it was in school. Everywhere else is, a few percent here, a few percent there. Kids most often get COVID in schools more often than in any other setting. So that's a complete lie. So you're dealing, as far as the union negotiating here and making concessions, they're lying to you. That's not good faith bargaining. Anyway, reiterating the strong stance she took during the 5-day shutdown. She encouraged families to get their children vaccinated. Yeah, fine. And to sign up for in-school COVID-19 testing. Insufficient. By the way, what happened with Lori Lightfoot? Oops, she got COVID. So, she gets to work from home. None of the students do, none of the teachers do, etc. One key part of the agreement could soon make a difference. The school district set a trigger for when a high number of teacher absences could move a school to remote learning. This fall, there were examples of schools with high cases and quarantines. That was the Delta wave, but remained open with skeleton crews and staff, and no way to pause to slow the spread. The school district said that no schools moved to all remote learning on Wednesday, though at least one had the majority of classes learning remotely. The school district has so far refused to put out school-level information on how many classes are flipped to remote. Some schools had multiple classrooms that were flipped to remote temporarily. Chicago Public Schools says that's a short-term measure while it investigates a COVID-19 case. Still, the teachers' union could not get the mayor and school district to compromise on some key issues. Yeah, you also only struck for 1 week. Top among them was when to restart in-person learning. The union wanted to wait until January 18, with students remote until then. Pause again. What fucking difference is that going to make? What difference is that going to make? I saw another school that they're doing, remote for the first week of classes. What difference do you think that's going to make? You need a longer term plan here. I'm pulling my hair out watching this because it's just like, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. They must know this too. That's not going to make a major difference with the disease that spreads as quickly as Omicron. You're going to shut down for a week, take whatever, negative consequences of that you think you're going to get, and then 2 weeks later, you're going to be right back to where you were. It's just amazing to me. I don't know what to say. What can you even say? I'm speechless. I'm beyond words at this point. Really, it's so frustrating. It's very frustrating. My head just feels like it's going to explode reading these things. It's so frustrating watching these predictable mistakes being made over and over. The mayor refused to consider any sort of metric to move the school district to shift to all remote learning, even during an extreme surge in COVID-19 cases. The union pushed hard for this. Comment, though again, they didn't strike hard for it. The other area where the mayor would not relent is on who would get COVID-19 testing. The union wanted all students automatically eligible for testing unless a parent opted them out. They wanted 10% of randomly selected students to be tested each week. The mayor would not give in, saying parents had to affirmatively opt their children in. I want to just walk away from all of this because it's like a nightmare. You have a pandemic. It's hitting 1 million cases, and that's just what's being tested and counted a day. We had 855, 920 some cases in a day this week. That's every day. And you're quibbling over how to test people, or whether you should test people. In my mind's eye, I just see a giant fireball headed towards the United States. And, there's 330 million people in this country, most of whom are working people. This just sucks. The mayor and school district agreed to the 10% testing of students at each school, but this depends on teachers and staff getting enough students to opt into the testing. The school district will provide a $1,000 stipend for school staff to sign up students for testing and vaccinations. You know, this is what happens when you got a pandemic going and you have a half-assed response the entire way through for 2 years, then the virus mutates, and you're caught with your pants down because you thought you could just fucking slack all the way through it. Well, now look at what's happening. The district is also allowing for verbal consent to testing, rather than waiting for parents to sign up online, which some parents have found cumbersome. Still up in the air is whether the 5 canceled days will be made up at the end of the year, and teachers paid for wages lost during the shutdown. The union maintains they should be if the school district is worried about children missing instruction. But the mayor punted the question to Martinez, and he hasn't said what he intends to do. Meanwhile, at some schools on Monday, students and parents said little instruction was taking place because of staff absences. At Taft High School on the far northwest side, junior Emma Pekizer asked her mother to pick her up after spending much of the morning in the auditorium after class had no teacher or substitute. Emma said she didn't feel safe in an auditorium with dozens of other students, many of whom didn't have quality masks, and pulled their masks down to talk to friends. See, that's what I'm talking about. She said the school handed out N95 type masks at the beginning of the day, but many kids were still wearing lower quality ones. Her mother, Sean Pekizer, said it's better to keep students home if there is no learning happening and safety protocols aren't followed. That's a very good point, because otherwise you could be at home not being exposed to anything rather than being in a disease warehouse, where just viruses being shared. Her daughter was able to log into some classes from home. She said the debate has gone beyond school safety. Quote, "It's not even a fight about is it safe or not," Pekizer said. It is, are the schools actually able to function? And obviously Lori Lightfoot, commenting now, Lori Lightfoot wants to just keep up the appearances that they are, whether they actually can be schools or not. And at that point, just admit what you're doing. You're warehousing kids so that you can send their parents to dangerous working conditions. That's what we've got. It's not a plan, and if cases keep going up, which is projected by most models that I've looked at, this is just going to get worse and worse. Anyway, continuing the quote, "This is not a functional school if students are locked together in a crowded auditorium," unquote. Chicago Public Schools said 82% of teachers reported to Taft on Wednesday. So, in other words, 18% didn't. Student attendance was still being calculated. It was low on January 3 and 4, the first days after winter break, at 66% and 72%, respectively. So, yeah, more than 1 in 4, and in some places 1 in 3 did not show up. CPS's COVID tracker shows that 9,200 students and 2,200 adults were in quarantine as of Tuesday. CPS said in some cases in high schools where there isn't a substitute, students can be moved to an auditorium and the majority are supposed to be logged into remote classes. CPS says it's facing a national substitute shortage and is offering incentives to hire more. The school district says it's added 455 since the start of the school year. So that's the end of that article. We got one more here. But really, this is what happens when you try to just operate as normal and deny COVID. That's what the Democrats have, their own version of COVID denial. It's a little more sophisticated, but it's still basically COVID denial. Why? Because capital demands sacrifice. Capital demands that we keep running. So to illustrate this point, I enjoy this cartoon. This is a version of the "This is fine" meme. And there's a quote added to the top. "Omicron's mild. Let it rip." 1 month later, "Why isn't my trash getting picked up? Where's the produce at the grocery store? Why did the clinic cancel my biopsy appointment? Why hasn't my kid's teacher come back to school? I demand service." This is mild. House is burning down. That is exactly where we're at. That's not even an understatement, in my opinion. So anyway, the last thing that I want to factor into this discussion is from another article. This is from Newsweek. Chicago teachers have another chance at remote learning as union leaders prepare for vote by Catherine Fung. And this was actually written before that vote. But what it highlights is that prior to the general membership, the rank and file vote, which I just also want to add, 25,000 members got electronic ballots. As we heard in the previous article, only about 18,500 voted. So like 2 out of 3 voted. Come on, participate. But anyway, that vote was actually after the union leadership had voted. And the union's what they call the House of Delegates, which has 700 members. They voted basically 2-1, 63 to 27%, to suspend the work action. So basically, you know, you can see that the rank and file, it was really close. It was like 56 to 44. In the leadership, it's 63 to 27. So when I talk about concessionist policy in the union leadership, this has been the story for decades now in U.S. labor unions. It's full of non-confrontational, certainly non-revolutionary minded people. And this is just suicidal for any working people's movement because capital has power, they're in power now. The only way that you can build up labor as a counterpower is by remembering what is the only commodity that workers have? Labor. Therefore, our only power is to withhold the only commodity that we have, labor. It's literally all you can do, okay? I mean, and then, you know, beyond that, you can organize to coordinate that in particular ways. But the withholding of labor is the fundamental thing. And there you have the leadership voting 2-1 to go back to work. And then the rank and file, it's closer to 1-1, although, you know, it squeaked by. But, you know, the U.S. labor movement, not in great shape. We are seeing more strikes, and that's great. It's got to pick up. And, you know, I hope over the next decade to see a real increase in militancy and radicalism. That's important. That's one of the things we're hoping to foster here at the channel, doing the education that we're doing. Anyway, I hope that this has been interesting, and although I'm ending on kind of a down note there, inspirational. You know, this is what happened this week, this month. Obviously, there could be more walkouts in Chicago and beyond. You know, I think that that's probably the only thing that's going to save us at this point from more COVID exposure, because it's clear the government, both parties, really want to just pretend that the pandemic's not happening. And of course, we working people, including students, and including students who aren't of school age yet, young children who are waiting to become a student, we're the ones who take it on the chin, and it's got to stop, and direct action gets the goods. We've got to remember that. We do not have political power yet as a class, and organizing direct actions right now, along with organizing the political parties that someday can lead the movements, we got to do it. We got to do it. So anyway, hats off to everybody who has been participating in a walkout or is planning one. Really, I think that this is vital at this point. And actually, I personally was planning on doing a training program this term, and I had to cancel it because it's just simply not safe. Now, I suffer from that. You know, my life goes on to pause because the program where I'd be seeking the credentials just isn't making accommodations, and so I don't get to enhance my credentials, and so I can't use those in the labor marketplace. And basically, you know, I just have to wait longer in my current situation. And yeah, so I feel you, everybody who is feeling challenged by these conditions. It's really bad. And, you know, don't sacrifice your health. It's really not worth it. But we do need to band together and support each other. So join an organization or make a contribution to one if you're not ready to join. But do look around in your area and see who's doing useful work that, you know, looks like something that you'd like to get involved with, and that looks like a functional, active organization. This is key. A good test is how quickly do they respond to you when you have questions. But anyway, what do you think? Leave a comment, question in the discussion area below, and we'll continue that there as always. Thanks again for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so I really appreciate those, and thank you. If you'd like to help out without making a donation, like, share, subscribe, comment, even if it's just good video or thanks. All that helps to boost the channel, helps more people to see this content, so I appreciate that. The channel has been growing steadily, and we want to keep it growing steadily, so your participation as the audience definitely helps that. Thank you all for that. Not just on behalf of me doing this channel, so I'm not just shouting into the void, but thank you on behalf of all the people who are about to find this channel, are about to listen to the audiobooks, are about to get the commentary that they might not have seen had you not helped to boost the channel in the algorithm and all that, and sharing it on social media. So that's key. Like I said, otherwise join an org or contribute to one or start a project of your own, whatever it is that you're doing in support of socialism. Thanks for your contribution, and we'll catch you in the next video.